Okay, so you want to use checkboxes in your Microsoft Excel worksheet to apply conditional formatting to your values. Here's an example. If I wanted to show the top salesperson in this list, I'd tick this box. The bottom salesperson, I'd tick this box. Those that had met the sales target, I'd tick this box. And those who hadn't, I'd tick this box. Let's see how this can be achieved. So to insert the checkboxes in your spreadsheet, you need to show the Developer tab on your ribbon. It doesn't show by default, so if you right-click on one of the other tabs and choose Customize the ribbon, you then tick this option here, Developer, click on OK, and your Developer tab will appear on your ribbon. Go to the Developer tab, go to the Insert button, and under Form Controls, there's your checkbox button. Click on it. Click somewhere in your sheet. You get a checkbox. And you can change this text just by deleting the existing text. And I'll type top sales as my label. And then you can right-click again to see the handles. And then you can drag the checkbox to wherever you want it to appear in your worksheet. Now, if I right-click again on this checkbox and go to Format Control, I need to be on the Control tab within this dialog box, and there's the ability here to link the output of the checkbox to a cell. So I'm going to click in this cell link box, and then I'm going to link this checkbox to cell G5. Click on OK. And you'll see that when I tick this checkbox, true now appears in that cell, and when I untick it, false now appears in that cell. So what we need to do now is create the three other checkboxes. So what I can do is right click on here, copy, paste, drag into position, change the text here. I'm going to right click, Format Control, and this checkbox I want to link with this cell. Click on OK. Click outside the checkbox, just check it's working. It is. So let's create the other two checkboxes. Paste again. Met sales target. Now, I can't see the text for this checkbox in full anyway, so if I right-click, then I can drag out the width of this control. And right-click, Format Control, and I want to link this checkbox with cell G7. I'll copy this, paste, and sales target, right click, Format Control, cell link G8. If I widen this column a little, let's see if all these checkboxes work. They do. Now we can align and distribute these checkboxes so it looks a bit tidier. Right click on the first checkbox, then hold down Control and select the other checkboxes, and that's also with the right mouse button. Then go to the Shape Format tab on your ribbon, go to Align, Align Left, and then you can also distribute them vertically. Now I put a background color on these cells, and I also put a border around it. Now don't worry about these true and falses that appear here. We'll eventually hide them. But let's now see how these outputs can be used to apply conditional formatting. Well, our first job here is to highlight the salesperson that has achieved the top sales value. And what I'm going to do in this column is begin to create a formula. I want to know whether this value is equal to the maximum value in this range. So obviously that isn't true for that value, But if I changed it to 100,000, it would be. I'll just undo that. Now I need to copy this formula down the rest of this column. So I'm going to lock this range reference. I've selected it, and then I'm pressing the F4 key on my keyboard, and that puts the dollars in those cell references. If F4 doesn't work for you, type the dollars in as you see them there. And I'm going to copy this down. And you can see I get a true for Bill's sales amount. Now the reason why we want true and falses is because we can use these same tests within conditional formatting. And if the test returns true, then Excel will apply the conditional formatting. But I actually want this to say true if this checkbox is ticked. So to achieve that, I need to put the current test within the AND function. This will be our first test, but we've also got a second test. So I'll put a comma at the end there and then refer to this cell, which is the output for this checkbox. So in other words, if this returns true and there's a true in G5, we want the AND function to return true. I must lock that cell reference, and again I've done that with the F4 key. Close the bracket and copy this down. And if I untick this checkbox, you can see now that the one true becomes false. So now I have the complete formula that I need for my conditional formatting. So what I'm going to do is copy this formula and select these sales values. I go to conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format. Click in this box here, format values where this formula is true, and paste in my formula. Then I need to choose a format that will be applied if this formula returns true. So I'm going to choose a dark green background and some white text. Click on OK. So if I tick this checkbox, it now formats the highest value in this range. Now what would be really nice is if it also highlighted the salesperson's name when we applied this conditional formatting. What we would need to do is lock the column reference in this cell reference here. So it would look like this, $B3. So what we're saying is that the conditional formatting that we apply to this column depends on the value held in column B, because when I copy the formula across, it's still referring to column B, which is the column that we're applying the criteria to. So what I'll do is copy this formula with the edit. I'll clear the conditional formatting that we currently have applied. I'll select both columns, conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format, and paste in our modified formula. I'll choose the format and click on OK. So now you can see that it applies the conditional formatting to the whole row. Now the rule for the bottom sales value is very similar to what we've just created. All we would need to do is change this to min, so it evaluates whether the value is the smallest value in the range. So I'm going to copy that formula, select both columns here, conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format, paste in my formula, and choose a different format. Now at the moment, this checkbox controls both those formats, but I want this red format to be controlled by this checkbox. So I need to make a slight modification to that last conditional format. So I go to Manage Rules, select the rule I want to change in Edit, and the change I need to make is to do with this cell reference here. At the moment it's looking in G5, but I actually want to look in G6. Click on OK, click on OK. So now you can see that the conditional formattings are applied independently. Right, so I'll get rid of these formulas that we created for the top and bottom sales. And now we want to evaluate whether the sales value has met the sales target. We have our sales target here in G2. So I'm going to write another test. I'm going to say, is this value greater than or equal to the sales target, which I need to lock? If I copy that down, you can see that I have a true if the value has met the sales target and a false if I don't. Now I only want a true if this checkbox is ticked. So I've got to put this within the AND function, comma, G7, which I need to lock. Copy down. So if I untick this checkbox, I get all falses. Now I want the conditional formatting to be applied to both of these columns, so it highlights the whole row. So that's where I need to lock the column reference for B3. So I've got $B3. So now I have my formula. I can copy it, select both these columns, conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format, paste in my formula, format, fill, I'll have this light green and a white font. That now works. Under sales target would be very similar. All I'd need to do is change this comparison operator. Copy the formula. Select both columns. Conditional formatting, new rule. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. Paste the formula in. Format. Bright red. Background. White font. Click on OK, click on OK. So what I must remember to do for under sales target is make sure it's looking at this cell reference rather than this one. So if you've forgotten to do that, go to conditional formatting, manage rules, go to this rule here, edit rule, and I'm looking in G8 for the true rather than G7. Click on OK, click on apply. So now you can see that these work independently. And I have my 4 checkboxes that format my table. Now, once you've created all the formulas, you can just get rid of these additional columns. We just used these columns to rehearse or experiment with our formulas, our logical tests. And to hide these true and false values, select all those cells, Control 1 on your keyboard, go down to Custom, and in the type box, just type 3 semicolons, and they'll be hidden. Okay, let's look at example 2. So in our second example, we want to highlight accounts that are over budget. Let's insert our checkbox, Developer tab, Insert. There's the checkbox button. I'll click here. And I'll type over budget accounts. Now if you need to make this wider so you can see all the text, just right click and then drag out the width of the control. Right click and then reposition it. Right click, format control. On the Control tab, link the checkbox to a cell. So I'll link it to H2. Just check it's working. It is. So the formula for this, very simply, would be, is actual greater than budget? But also, does H2 contain true? So if you remember, it's AND, open bracket, comma, H2. Which needs to be locked. Close the bracket, press enter. So if I copied this down and I tick this, you can see that wherever we have an overspend, we've now got true in this column. Now, if I want to apply this conditional formatting to a whole row, I'd need to lock the column reference for D2 and C2. And then copy this formula, select all the columns, home, conditional formatting, new rule. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. Paste in your formula. Format, fill, red background, white font. Click on OK, click on OK, and now it works. Get rid of this, and you can hide this. Select the cell, Control 1, custom, 3 semicolons. Click on OK. Example 3. So with example 3, what we want to do is see which customers in February are new customers. So let's insert our checkbox. Right click, format cell. Cell link to, I'll say I2. Let's just move this a little bit and see if it works. It does work. Now the formula for this will need a VLOOKUP. I'm looking up to see whether this value here appears in this column here, which I need to lock, returning values from column 1 and doing an exact match. Now if I copy this down, wherever I've got an NA error, it means that this customer name hasn't been found in this column, so it must be a new customer. So I just need trues and falses, so I can put this within the isNA function. And now I've got my trues and my falses. But I only want a true if this is true, so if this checkbox is ticked. So this is where I use and I want to refer to I2, which I need to lock. Now if I want to apply the conditional formatting to the whole row, I need to lock the reference to D in the D2 cell reference. Then I've got my formula that I can use for conditional formatting. Copy it, select both columns, home, conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format, paste in your formula, format, fill, gold background, click on OK, click on OK. So if I now tick this option here, it shows which customers are new customers. So I can clear this column and select that cell, the output cell, Control 1, custom, 3 semicolons. So in our last example, we want a checkbox that will change the color of cells that contain a formula. So we'll insert a checkbox over here. Show formula cells. Just move this. Right click, format control, cell link, I'll say L2. Now to check whether a cell has a formula in it, you can use a function called isFormula. So for example, if I checked whether cell A1 contained a formula, it would return false. But if I checked whether cell H2 had a formula, it would return true. There is the formula. So I'm going to go back to checking whether cell A1 has a formula. That will be my first test, but I'd also need to know whether there is a true in L2. I'll use and L2, which I need to lock. Close the bracket, press enter. So that is the test I need. So I'm going to copy it and select all the cells that I want to apply this conditional formatting to. So I might say, well, I'm never going to use more than 20 rows. Then I go to conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format, paste in your formula, and then choose a format. Click on OK. So if I now tick this checkbox, you can see that it highlights all the cells that contain a formula. Now, if you're wondering why these column headings have also been highlighted, it's because I've put a little formula in there that automatically changes the column headings to reflect the last 6 years worth of sales. Okay, that's all I wanted to cover in this particular video. Hopefully that's useful. If it is, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you next video.